Yeah, we were close to 50 when I came in August of 21. We are near, if we haven't already, eclipsing 100. So we've almost doubled in size and more than doubled in revenue.
Have you ever wondered how successful architecture, engineering, and construction companies scale their business?
Or have you ever wanted guidance on how to get more growth, wealth, and freedom from your AEC company?
Well, then you're in luck. Hi, I'm Will Forat.
And I'm Justin Nagel, and we're your podcast hosts.
We interview successful AEC business leaders to learn how they use people, process, and technology to scale their businesses.
So sit back and get ready to learn from the industry's best. This is Building Scale.
Hey listeners, it's Will here. Our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy. If you've ever listened to our show, then you know that the three pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology. So if you suspect technology is your weak link, then book a call with us to see where we can help maximize your company's IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
Today's guest is Tyler Johnston, CEO of Berg Enterprises, Inc., BEI, as we say. BEI is a family-owned company based in Arizona, specializing in turnkey HVAC, mechanical, plumbing, and pipe fitting services in the commercial and federal markets. And they have been around since 1974, which is 50 years, which is amazing. It's always good to see the longevity of a business. Tyler formerly worked at Black & Veatch, developing energy partnerships and new technologies. He has experience in business development roles at NRG Energy and General Electric, focusing on distributed energy deals. He also served as an infantry officer in the United States Marine Corps, leading combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. He has his BS from the United States Naval Academy, MBA from Columbia Business School, and we're super excited, Tyler, to learn more about the leadership that you have at Berg, as well as your perspectives on energy and HVAC goodness. We definitely want to thank you for your service, so thank you for that. And with all that said, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Justin and Will. Appreciate y'all having me.
Yeah, no. The first time we talked, Tyler, I was baffled. You'd lived more life in a 10-year span than I have in my 30, will be 37 later this month. So I loved it. And Arizona guy, so love that too. Lots of good vibes. And you're a hat man, which I'm also a hat man, which that to me is that's the pinnacle point of manhood, is when you wear a hat every day. That's my opinion. No offense, Will. Anyway, so I said a bunch of fun stuff about you that was absolutely not nearly to the level of the awesome stuff you've done. So tell us that real origin story. Tell us how you got to be the CEO of Berg, and tell us just how awesome the company is.
Yeah, I want to start out by thanking you all for having me. I've been a fan of the podcast for a while. I know we've been talking about doing this, and I think you guys have had some really good content and some really good guests. So honored and humbled to be among them, and appreciate you reaching out and engaging with me. So can give you a quick background if that's a good start, and then
Cool.
We can kind of take it from there. So I'll go over the background of the company and myself in parallel, because there's a couple intersections throughout. So my grandfather started the company in 1974 in southern Arizona, outside of a little town called Sierra Vista. There's an Army base there that's significant for both the Army Intel Command as well as NetCom, which is their comms infrastructure across the DoD. So as that base grew, Berg's through the 70s and 80s, Berg served the growth around that in the residential and light commercial markets. I was born in 84, so coming up on my 40th later this month, so a little bit ahead of you on the race to 40 there. Worked in the company as a middle schooler and high schooler in the shop, in the field, riding around with my grandfather, doing various low man roles, as I call them, getting to know the industry and the business. My grandfather passed away my junior year of high school in 2001, and my mom and her two older brothers took over the company. My mom led the treasury and finance aspects, and then one uncle did residential, Rick, and another uncle, Mark, did commercial. So I graduated in 2003, went to the Naval Academy, and never was really involved in the business again until recently. Certainly talked to my mom and family about it over the years and watched from afar, but got really involved again in 2021, exactly about 3 years ago from this month. I served as an infantry officer, as you said, in the Marine Corps, platoon commander deployment in Iraq, and then was embedded with the Afghan Army in southern Helmand province in Afghanistan. Spent a lot of time training host nation forces across Iraq and Afghanistan, and had some pretty remarkable and great experiences doing that. When I got out of the Marine Corps in 2012, after a little stint training other advisors, I really wanted to get into enterprise sales and business development, because I saw what I had done in the military was essentially infiltrating a partner organization and then moving initiatives through that and building rapport with various stakeholders that were necessary. So it seemed like an easy fit or transition from the military, and then was also very interested in energy, just given some of my observations in other parts of the world where folks aren't so lucky to have the energy infrastructure that we do in, most places in the U.S. So did a transition program at Siemens Energy briefly, and then was a project manager at General Electric, managing gas turbine services on the North Slope of Alaska for ConocoPhillips and for a handful of other pipeline companies in the Southeast. We also had an engineering group in Florence, Italy, where GE Oil and Gas was based at the time before it became Baker Hughes, and got to spend a lot of time liaising and going back and forth with Florence. So, similar muscle movements to what I did as an advisor. Did my MBA at Columbia, an executive program, so commuted back and forth to New York while I was at GE. Went to a company called NRG after that, developing renewable energy and backup generation deals for large Fortune 100s, mainly pharma and entertainment. And then the last 2 or 3 years of my career before coming to Berg's, I got the opportunity to work at a 115-year-old EPC called Black & Veatch, highly respected in the industry. They've built power plants for the last century or so, and we're expanding into the distributed energy business, and got to lead business development and do some cool projects there with on-site solar with banks, as well as a handful of backup generation projects with oil and gas companies and other pipelines. So most of my career has been in distributed energy, a little bit of project management, which is where I started out, and I think where many veterans start out, getting kicked in the teeth for a little while as they learn about business. And then transition into more front-end sales and business development. And then recently in 21, we could talk more about that, I'm sure, came on board to lead my family's business from the third generation with a handful of very talented leaders that have followed me into the business, and I've been learning a ton about HVAC and where it's come since I worked in it last, and how it intersects with my energy background as well. So that's a little bit about me and what got me here to today.
Wow. That is, you talk about stories. That one took us all over the place, halfway around the globe. That one took us, energy is all about construction. So we could definitely see you kind of continued your career path around construction there. What ultimately brought you back? What brought you back into Berg?
Yeah, so, I've always been proud of what my grandfather built. I've always wanted to run my own thing and lead a company. And as I looked at that, and, I'd been at Black & Veatch for 3 years through the pandemic, interesting time, working virtually and remote, and being pretty far away from actions on objective or the construction side of the business. I wanted to lead something, and I thought, what better than something that's already 50 years old? There's not a lot of things that are 50 years old anymore, and that brings a lot of authenticity as well as opportunity. Given the experience set, and given we have some employees that have been here that whole time. One employee still specifically. So getting to learn from folks who have been in the industry a long time was really appealing. And then secondly, I always knew as I worked in the energy industry, HVAC is about 30% of the national load at any point, more so in probably hotter areas like Texas and Arizona. So I knew that those were challenges that were going to have to be addressed. I think that the current administration did a lot of work at the beginning with the infrastructure bills that they passed and different focus there. And I think we've seen a lot of HVAC as a component there. So I was excited to learn a little bit about a new part of the industry and kind of a precursor into what I did on the distributed energy side. And ultimately, I wanted to get closer to the projects again. And I've gotten to spend a lot of time on site with some remarkable folks that have worked for Bergs for varying periods of time. So between getting to run something and getting to be the steward of something that's 50 years old is super humbling. And then getting to spend a lot of time kind of in a new industry closer to the point of friction was appealing to me as well.
So there's a lot of books and a lot of topics around leadership and the military experience that you have. Why don't you talk a little bit about, sort of the leadership, especially going into this role? What's the same? What's different, let's say, in comparison to your military training and your kind of how you've done things in the past versus now?
Yeah, and enterprise experience too, right? Like those are very different. Small business or mid-sized business compared to military compared to enterprise is just like so different. Love to hear your balance of those.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the foundation for any young infantry officer is a book called Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication 1, or MCDP 1, Warfighting. It's about a 100-page book. I actually have it right here. So it's 100 pages, fits in a cargo pocket, so you can carry it anywhere. I've read it probably 100 times or more. There's a PDF of it online as well, so you can access it for free. You don't have to spend money on it. It was written in the 80s by a series of officers in the Marine Corps and overseen by a commandant who recently passed away called General Gray. And it is a way of thinking about war fighting and maneuver warfare for young officers in leading. And there's some tenets in it that shine throughout the book. I think one of the most important ones is centralized vision, decentralized execution. And I've seen this, go well and go not well in my corporate life and at Bergs as well. A leader is responsible for setting a vision for an organization and doing the work to clearly articulate that to his or her people. So if a mission fails, it's always goes back to the leader, and it almost always goes back to failure to clearly articulate the vision. And you recruit and train good people that have solid character and solid values, and then you give them, a mission and an intent. Commander's intent is another big one in that. You don't necessarily tell them what it should look, or you tell them what it should look like at the end, not how to do that, right? And then you step back and you let them execute. And the Marine Corps believes, and I believe, that decisions are typically best made closest to the point of friction, and that's the decentralized execution side of this. So empowering small unit leaders to be able to make decisions rapidly, closest to where those decisions arise, and under the framework of left and right lateral limits that a leader has given them and guidance has given them, allows an organization to operate, really rapidly and ultimately outcycle the enemy, whether that's, in combat, that's the enemy. And in my experience on the enterprise side, that's been market conditions, that's been competitors, that's been clients, and ultimately being able to receive information, execute on it, and then assess and redo that cycle over and over again. So I think it's centralized vision, decentralized execution. It's setting a commander's intent. It's, services and gaps and not attacking surfaces and exploiting gaps. And there's a lot of things in there that we learn and employ in, tactical scenarios that I think really give young officers almost an unfair advantage when they come out into certain roles, if they can see those lessons as assets that the government has given them for serving.
Wow. So what you described is what I would consider a perfectly run organization. That's a flat organization structure right there, right? One person giving vision, or a very small group of people helping with vision, and the rest are the workforce near and dear to whatever the work is, the mission, right? Do you treat jobs as individual missions in Berg? How do you look at that? Yeah,
absolutely. And to give listeners some context, we are we are a diversified HVAC shop. We do a lot of things, and that's how, most smaller HVAC shops grow up, and certainly my family's was no different. We have regional projects, so that's stuff in Arizona where we're licensed. That's everything from Dollar Generals to academic campuses to retail and restaurants, and that's a new part of the business that we're expanding outside of Cochise County. We have a burgeoning commercial services business. We do HVAC service, maintenance, and transactional call-out service for the Border Patrol and other entities that support them. In Southern Arizona, we have a couple high rises that we service in Tucson and Phoenix, and we're growing that side of the business. But the core, and we have a small residential business down in Sierra Vista as well. That was legacy part of the business that we've spun off and is standing on its own now and doing great as a standalone business. But the majority of the revenue is federal work. So we have folks who have been with the company a long time and have a lot of experience doing this, and we've refined the operational structure, the leadership structure, the communications infrastructure. I'm sure we'll talk about a lot of that. But ultimately, it's guys and a few girls already going out to hard-to-reach locations across the Southwest. We work in tribal lands in New Mexico. We work in all across the border region in Arizona through Texas, lots of places in Arizona that are hard to get to, FOBs in the middle of nowhere for the Border Patrol. And really what sets us up for success is mission planning and that execution. So the guy who sits in this chair is another infantry Marine. He's my COO named Crest Clippard. He's a peer group behind me in the Marine Corps, did an Afghan deployment, I think in 13 or 14, and thinks about this stuff a lot of the same way I do. So we also have one of our senior installers that's worked his way all the way up with us is now our superintendent in charge of the workforce, and he could be easily compared to a platoon sergeant in the military. That's somebody that when you show up to a new platoon and you're a 22-year-old lieutenant who's only been through a 3-month school, and you have the honor of leading Marines that have been squad leaders in multiple tours of combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's humbling. And there's typically a senior enlisted person that's assigned to you as your platoon sergeant who helps guide you through that and helps you be a better officer. I certainly had a couple of really good ones in my career. James Brooks being who was my first platoon sergeant, learned a ton from him. And we've built that same structure here. We identified the leaders in a company that didn't have a really formal leadership structure, and built superintendents to oversee multiple jobs in multiple areas. And then we've started training foremen over the last year to lead, actions on site at these projects. So there's a lot of parallels. I told Justin in some of our prep calls that this is the closest I feel that I've been to leading Marines since getting out of the Marine Corps. Similar issues you're dealing with, similar liberty challenges that you're dealing with when you've got guys operating and girls in austere locations where, the only local watering hole is an Applebee's. So there's always issues that arise that you got to work through, but ultimately, they're beautiful to watch. It's like, I have a ton of hope in the next generation, and everyone kind of bags on the generations behind them. But I've seen these kids do some pretty incredible things, working 610s on a processing facility in Nogales, Arizona for DHS for 4 months, doing another one of those 712s for 30 days. Just like being out in rough environments and we've got guys at Luke right now working in a building that's not air conditioned, and they have been throughout the summer, 8 to 10 hours. So those types of environments and those types of projects, and that's, like I said, a big amount of both our workforce and our revenue require a similar level of mission planning to what we did in the military. So I think those muscle movements are familiar, and ultimately, again, I'm forever indebted to Uncle Sam for giving me this skill set of tools that allowed me to go out and add value to my family business that otherwise I might not have been able to.
How do you find people to what you described does not sound pleasant, especially from a guy that has worked behind a desk his whole life, right? So like for me, it is a very foreign idea, but like, the industry, the construction space is just in general as a hiring, right? We're trying to find more people, trying to find good people. You have grown, like since you've come in, the company has grown, which is amazing. And we should talk more about that, but like, how do you find good young people that are down, with the mission, essentially?
Yeah, we were close to 50 when I came in August of 21. We are near, if we haven't already, eclipsing 100. So we've almost doubled in size and more than doubled in revenue in 3 years, which, that brings its own set of challenges in terms of how do you continue to deliver quality as you scale. And that's pretty much what I think about nonstop as we grow. But on the people side, I grew up in Southern Arizona in a little quirky town called Bisbee, which is about 30 minutes from Sierra Vista. I don't know if you guys have been there, but it's an old mining town that the mine shut down in the 70s, and it became kind of a hipster artist haven since then. But it's an hour and a half from Tucson. Sierra Vista is an hour and 10 minutes from Tucson. And when I was growing up, I really saw two pathways to getting out of Sierra Vista and going and seeing the world. One was going to college and one was going to the military, right? And neither of those are for everyone. And we've identified through all this that there is awesome opportunities to go win work on the road, if we're competitive, and we typically can be competitive in areas that are outside of major metro areas where we're differentiated from the talent that's in theater. Giving folks the opportunity to go see other parts of the country and, go make prevailing Davis-Bacon wages that are high in some instances. Our guys have worked in Miami, they've worked in Hawaii, they've worked in San Diego, they've worked in Washington, D.C. So they've gotten to go out on the road, without those other two paths and get out of Southern Arizona and broaden their perspective and meet people that don't look or talk like them, which I think is super valuable. So that's, kind of our worst kept secret is I think the rural locations in the border regions provide a level of work ethic and talent that is very strong, relative to peer groups in bigger cities. And that's not taking away from anyone that's grown up in bigger cities. I've certainly spent a lot of time in New York and San Francisco and other places, and I love them. But we see these rural areas in the Arizona and Texas borders as great places for talent. And then if we're winning federal work in significant infrastructure locations, and we hire locally, it helps us with, a handful of things. Obviously helps us with, getting folks on site and being able to staff up for projects, but it also helps us win additional work in market, and it helps us address warranty issues that arise after the core group of our folks have left. So, I was blessed to join a company that had a very talented core leadership group who are now our superintendents and our foremen and other leaders. But being able to move them around the area and assess and build talent in locations where there may not be a lot of other exciting opportunities to leave, I think it's served us really well. And then I'm not sure if this applies, broadly across the construction industry. It probably does, but at least within HVAC, in my experience, there's varying levels of skills, that are required within the industry. So someone that's motivated and hardworking can join even a federal project as long as they can get on base. And, we work through that regardless of somebody's background. And we have folks that we are able to get on bases that don't have the rosiest backgrounds. But as long as we can get them on base and they're willing to work and be motivated, there's tons of value that they can add on the site. I installed ductwork in high school, and I have a kind of a cursory understanding of it, but I frequently work on the job sites with my guys and a couple of girls that we've recently hired. And I don't, I'm not out there reading the prints and showing them where to hang ductwork and showing them where to run pipe. Like, that's the foreman, that's the superintendent's. Like, I'm just a helper. And I've proven, that it's easy to go out and add value if you're motivated and you want to learn, and you learn, as you get a bunch of these folks together that have a bunch of experience from within Bergs and from outside. And we've hired from outside as well recently. they bring new tips and tricks, and folks grow quickly. And that's essentially the idea behind the foreman training that my CEO and some of the other folks in the organization recently formalized. Is we identify this talent on the sites, we shift them from helpers to kind of like team leader roles, where they're, one thing we always say is someone's always in charge. If there's something we heard in the Marine Corps regularly, but if there's two guys doing something, one of them's in charge of the other one. And we've made that very clear. So we define who's in charge, and the other one follows while one leads. And we assess these folks in smaller scenarios, the superintendents and foremen do, to see if they can be trusted leading 3 or 4 guys on one part of a job site. And when they prove that they can, they start to lead, work on Saturdays if it's a skeleton crew. And ultimately we tag them, and we just put 12 foremen through our most recent training. There was some content we put out on LinkedIn and stuff, but those are guys that we watched over the last 6 to 12 months and said, you have potential to be a leader here at BEI, and then we put them in those positions. And as they move up, there's more, privileges, but there's way more responsibilities as well. And so you have kind of this varying level of folks that if folks come in motivated and fired up, and when we also recruit from a couple different community colleges in Arizona, we're in active conversations with some of the main federal prison systems right now. We're probably 15 to 20% formally incarcerated in our workforce now. And we're trying to formalize some of those programs, because there's trades programs that are happening in jails across Arizona. And we're, trying to understand how we can help those folks transition, because anyone, whether it's veterans, whether it's folks with challenging backgrounds, regardless, whether it's, farm kids from rural environments, they all bring diverse perspectives and skill sets. And, that's ultimately what the military was for us too. I was a kid from Southern Arizona who went to Annapolis when I was 18, which was one of the first times I traveled outside of the state, and just got exposed to a lot of people that thought and looked differently. And I think that that's a good thing for development of a person.
When you came, so 3 years ago, you come in, obviously you doubled number of people as well as doubling revenue. Obviously, the structure of how things are shaped, superintendents and these things. What are other things that you were changing? Like you professionalize what was going on. Obviously, you have this big brand, 50-year-old brand, amazing. It's lived the test of time. It's doing all those things, your grandfather's name on it, all of those emotions. But you come in and you're like, well, we got to change some things because we want to, have growth. We want to have more people. We want to, take over all of the HVAC in the country, right? So what else was changing that made you grow so fast?
Yeah, I think we'll talk about technology primarily, but I'll kind of set the table and just give you guys a little overview of the situation that I stepped into. So when in early 2021, I had, I'm the third generation, like I said, and I'm the only one that's not a Berg, because I'm a Johnston. My mom's the baby and the daughter. So when I came in, I had 3 cousins and a spouse and 2 uncles in the business, and there was parts of the business that were working really well. We had a residential business that was basically just a cash cow that floated a lot of the other kind of expansion and growth that they explored outside of the state. And I had a cousin that was doing a great job of running that. And I think, it would have, we have since changed leadership, and I saw things differently than some of my cousins, and my uncles and my mom ultimately decided to work with me because there was a pathway forward to getting them retired and getting them out of the business. And so, the first thing I did when I came in is try to learn as much about, them running the business as possible, right? They had been running the business for most of their adult lives since I left and went to the military and did other things. So there's a lot of really solid perspectives I got from them, and they left at different times. Some of them stayed longer than others, and I learned a ton from each of them, and they added a lot of value, and it's unfortunate that we're not still working together, but they went on and did other things. So, first, identifying what was not broken and what was broken, and trying to kind of bring resources and assets to the stuff that was broken. It was a turnaround situation. They were growing rapidly, and there was a couple projects that were signed that, probably didn't have a thorough pre-construction effort done, or definitely didn't have a thorough pre-construction effort done. And like I said, the kind of organizational structure was really a lot more immature than it is now. There were certainly field leaders that were in charge of certain projects, but they were traveling from project to project. And the way they got this started out is in 2010, 11, they started working on a project on Fort Huachuca, the military base nearby, for a large government contractor, and then that government contractor asked them to travel and to go to other locations with them. So, it was like they called themselves a traveling band of misfits, but it was a group of guys that lived in toy haulers and like I said, worked in really austere conditions and built a business from scratch. So when I came in, I had the luxury of a very established statement of qualifications, we call it, but project experience list. They'd done 40 or 50 of these. So tons of knowledge inside the organization that you have to capture, especially when you're coming from corporate America and you haven't been living that lifestyle. Like, you have to capture that first. But then I was looking at it kind of from the Marine Corps tenets of like shooting, moving, and communicating. Those are the three like pillars for an infantry unit to be effective. So, we'd call shooting like actions on objective. Berg's has always defined itself all the way back to my grandfather with exceeding quality that surpasses all the other folks in the market. We haven't always been the cheapest. We're not the cheapest, but we always had a reputation on our resi side for fixing a $200 capacitor. If we could fix a $200 capacitor and not fleecing some, old lady for a new unit. And there's many unscrupulous resi contractors that do that. And then on the federal side, we were always proud of the product we delivered. And we didn't always make money on the jobs, but my family had delivered every single one of them. There was not one that they had ever walked off of, not done, even at their own detriment. So actions on objective, like shooting, in my opinion, was probably the most developed in this business. The communication layer was effectively non-existent. Many of them were using personal cell phones or personal email addresses, or just, didn't even have company communication assets. No concept of like video chats and, virtual syncs and stuff like that, which I just worked at a 115-year-old construction company as they went through. One of the most forward-thinking things I saw Black & Veatch do is they put teams in place about 6 months before the pandemic, and they were much better positioned during the pandemic to be able to operate in that environment. So, Berg's had been a small family business, hadn't experienced that. I'm preferential to Google. I've always loved G Suite. So that was the first thing we put in place. And we gave everyone a Gmail account. We put iPads in the hands of leadership where it made sense. And we pushed everyone to move all company communications into G Suite, not just emails, but text messages and everything else too. And then, we were at the same time fighting a lot of legacy issues that me and my leadership team weren't around for. So we ultimately had to, do that without proper documentation and email. So really, really driving a culture of putting everything in writing, communicating by email. And on the federal side, it's even more stringent in terms of there are certain things that you have to say in order to ensure that you're covered later for changes in scope or cost or time, things that have a cost or time impact. That has to be clearly articulated in order to have a claim later on or unable to defend yourself. So, the communications layer was good. Leadership was also important. I was very fortunate to have, initially Cress Clippard, who's my COO, and Ryan Harbuck, who's my VP of Pre-Construction and Design, came in early 22 at the same time. Ryan is a mechanical engineer who worked at a very respected design engineering firm in Tucson with roots that went all the way back to relationships with my grandfather. My grandfather's dream was always to have a mechanical engineer on board, so we call Ryan Dick's dream sometimes, because that was a fulfillment of that dream. And then on the operations side, Cress came in initially as VP of commercial before he took the COO title to lead the kind of execution side of things. And that's what I really saw as estimating and pre-construction and labor workforce management were really the left and right side of that needed to be fixed. So a communication suite in place and good leaders in place to put in a structure. I've since brought on 2 other direct reports after Ryan and Cress. I have a VP of brand named Ashley Gray and a VP of finance named Landon Jones, who's another Marine and a former investment banker who joined us in May. So as we have matured the platform, kept it alive, continue to win work and grow, we've leveled up leadership. Before we brought Landon in, I was doing all of the financial modeling, and all of the everything on the capital raising side, much more poorly than Landon's doing now because he did that professionally, right? So it's communications, it's leadership, and then the movement side of things is the last thing. Given that they were generally cash strapped as they scaled and grew, they bought used trucks that had maintenance issues, and they had some really cool concepts that they had developed, like mobile pipe fitting trailers where they could cut and thread, up to 8-inch round pipe. We have a trailer that they built that has full ductwork capability in it, so we can move that to a site and make ductwork. It's got a shear, it's got a brake, it's got a Pittsburgh machine. It's on one of the banner images on our website. So lots of really good ideas on the logistics side and the movement side. They'd done a submarine firefighter trainer in Hawaii where they put all the tooling and equipment on a Connex box without any formal gear lists or anything you could imagine from the military. They were able to figure that out and perform these jobs. So it was coming in with an operations or a logistics kind of function, and to be able to sit down with these unit leaders and plan, where they needed to have forward stage tooling supplies, where they needed to develop partnerships, relationships, where they needed to identify workforce to be able to ultimately execute. So, to summarize, it's like assessing what's there and honoring the fact that they've been running it for 47 years, and there's a lot of good that I got to inherit, and I'm fortunate for that. Putting in effective technology and tools to be able to communicate both on a project level, on a CRM level. We use Salesforce. On a finance level, we put NetSuite in place from QuickBooks, so upgrading some of that, and then ultimately, putting in the right leadership and the right assets or asset acquisition planning to be able to continue to maintain the quality as the company scales. And that's not something that happened in the first, couple months. That's something that's happening ongoing and has been for the last 3 years.
Well, I'm a big fan of all the technology improvements. That is definitely more new age kind of construction leaders. I would say old school leaders, a lot of them have not converted into that mentality. So kudos to you for thinking like that. I do have a question on the enterprise sales side. So your enterprise sales experience that, to kind of tie this conversation in. What experiences there, albeit technology, leadership, or otherwise, what tied in there? What did you bring in to Berg from there? Obviously, even seeing the Teams side, I'm sure Teams or the communication side showed you what technology can do. What else kind of did you take in terms of experiences around the sales side, bring into your organization?
Yeah. Well, I'll talk about the sales side first, and then more generally, just kind of corporate experience and how that benefited and would benefit someone looking to do a turnaround or an acquisition or something like that. So on the sales side, right as I was graduating from B school is when I got hired by NRG, and it was a pretty tumultuous time in the business. Their CEO had just been fired as I was interviewing. They brought in a new CEO. They had activist investors involved that were driving a lot of change. I came in as an account executive. There was 10 of us when I came in, and there was 3, kind of after all the cuts had happened and everything. So it was a very volatile environment. And one of the things that they put in place was a thing called Money Monday. And we had to come in on Mondays in a suit and tie. It was a consultant that they were working with named John McGuire, who had a legendary sales career in radio and media. And we had to come in a suit and tie and essentially be grilled by our direct manager all the way up to sometimes the CEO of a Fortune, 250, 300 company was coming in and sitting in on these with multiple account executives. And you had to walk through your pipeline, every single deal that you were chasing and what the progress had been since the last week. And, we had a lot of entertainment assets at NRG. So many clients would NRG has the naming rights to the Texans Stadium, and they had relationships across the NFL. So many clients would, either be a low-level client that wouldn't have the decision-making authority that was trying to essentially just, draw entertainment assets and time out of the organization, or just other things that were red flags that could stall deals that you didn't know about as a junior seller. So it was incredibly stressful time. Like, it was June in Houston, and we parked outside and had to walk 10 minutes to the indoor of the building. So you're sweating and you're in a suit and tie and you're just generally uncomfortable. And I think that, I went home the first night just complaining about it to my wife, being like, this is so dumb. Like, why do I have to do this? And she's like, you should be the best at this, over as much as you can. Strive to give the best presentation, the best overview. And it made me better. And the level of sophistication that, like, we were selling on-site solar, and some of the main folks we were targeting were sustainability directors. And one of my directors, a guy named Ken Cowan, who's another legend in the energy sales space, lots of experience across the industry. We identified at a Fortune 10 pharma company that we ultimately did a $30 million solar deal with 2 years later. We identified a sustainability director that had just been hired, and he went on monster.com. This is like 2016. And he pulled her job description, and he made me write my initial pitch based off of the job description that she had just hired into, right? So, and then when I was at GE, I was more on a project management side, but I oftentimes would go ride around the Southeast with these like grizzly old sales guys who were legacy guys from companies who had been acquired, who had worked at GE their whole career. And just like the windshield time with these guys was crazy in terms of just learning like all kinds of tips and tricks about how to be a better seller. Some of them had stories about going and just like working in utility plants, waiting rooms, and waiting to watch all of their clients walk by. So that's something that I did when I was calling on tech companies in Seattle, is I would just I would fly to Seattle from Houston for Black & Veatch and go sit in their lobby and start emailing people and saying, hey, like, I'm out in your lobby waiting for my other meeting that I flew here for, if you want to catch up. And I'd meet with 5 or 6 people that I wanted to engage with, right? So like, there's being uncomfortable amongst a bunch of other sellers makes you a lot stronger, and it pushes you out of your comfort zone. And then, at Black & Veatch was a challenging experience, because they were a very old, established, conservative, well-respected company that was trying to do this new innovative stuff in distributed energy and backup gen and load orchestration. And like, that broke a lot of internal processes, while I was there. And I caused a lot of headaches for a lot of people trying to drive things through that organization. But their conservatism rubbed off on me. And I appreciate it now as being the CEO of a company that, feeds 100 people, much less, 3 or 10,000 or 5,000, wherever they were at. So, ultimately, I think it's a combination of like experience of folks that have been selling for a long time and being uncomfortable in front of them. And then also just being a part of that corporate bureaucracy and infrastructure. Like, it sucks and it's miserable while you're in it, but there's a reason that it's structured like that, and you kind of know what right's supposed to look like. So when you go dive into a 50-person, $6 or $7 million construction company that's pretty cowboy and pretty renegade, you know what you can tolerate and what you can, and where you have to start making improvements, right? So I think those were the most tangible things, and there's many other highlights across a lot of my different experiences across GE, NRG, and Black & Veatch. But, I was always fortunate in corporate America to have civilian leaders that cared a lot about vets making the transition and spent a lot more time with me than they probably did with others in terms of educating me and explaining this and setting me up. So, and ultimately I would say that if somebody's thinking about like going into the search side of things or acquiring something or doing a turnaround, like some corporate experience, regardless of what it is going to be really valuable, just to understand kind of what right looks like and the order of prioritization on what you're improving and when you come into something.
I love the take the resume or take the job description and build the pitch on it. That to me is very smart by the leader there. That to me is like, oh my God, that's amazing. Which is something perhaps we will also think about doing as we go through different people as they need IT infrastructure and cybersecurity like that. Hey, that makes tons of sense. So it sounds like obviously the military and the corporate just kind of, you throw that in a big pot together, you swirl it around, and you get a Tyler out the other side. Is a little bit of how that all worked, which is amazing. That's phenomenal. You mentioned about technology and like, hey, like we needed to make these changes and do these things. It wasn't just like, hey, we need to get our technology better. It seemed like that you went the step further, like saying, hey, we need NetSuite and Salesforce. Like those are big expenses, right? Like those aren't like, oh, this is not a big deal. In addition to the changing to it, right? Like the expense of like, hey, everybody's got to be on the same page here. Why so aggressive with technology? Don't get us wrong, we love it, but like, why go from, hey, we got to get like our communication right to like, hey, let's get all of the books, all of the CRM, everything just tip top across the board? Where did you see the value of that exchange?
Well, it kind of just like becomes a rabbit hole that you go down, right? Like the communications infrastructure, G Suite, was pretty easy to put in place in a silo. Like the folks who did have emails were working off of Outlook, so there was some familiarity with like an office management system. But I've been very impressed to see how Google has really innovated, I believe, in front of some of the other providers in terms of an all-in experience for chats, spaces, comms, virtual calls, everything else. It's pretty seamless, and you get a lot of excuses at the beginning about, I can't figure all this stuff out, but they all have cell phones and they all are on social media and everything else. So, that's the easiest thing to put in place first. And the beginning of this year, we actually went 100% paperless. So finance was getting tired of like POs and packing slips being dropped off on their desk. And it's like, everything is in the drive. Like anyone who's a foreman or above has an iPad, has access to the drive, and any, piece of paper, documentation that's generated that needs to be saved and put into the ledger comes to finance through that person who generates it, uploading it into a Google Drive folder associated with that project or whatever. So that was, the lowest hanging fruit in terms of being able to put in place. On the Salesforce side, when I came in, there was a residential service business, right? Like they did about close to $1 million a year and a little less, $800K. And that's like your typical $200 to $300 maintenance agreement that you have, with someone on your home system, and then emergent service that happens. So they were on a program that had a pretty significant cost associated with it called FieldEdge that I didn't like at all. They didn't like it all. It wasn't customizable. We couldn't build it how we wanted. And then they were on a on-prem version of QuickBooks that didn't have cloud access. So when I was initially looking at their financials and consulting from afar and deciding if I wanted to do this in early 21, I would have to like remote into a on-prem computer to look at QuickBooks. And they had recently had a ransomware attack and another attempted one. So there was, there's vulnerabilities in the IT infrastructure. So I wanted everything in the cloud, off of the site, and secured. So I've had a lot of experience with Salesforce over the years. We use Salesforce diligently at NRG. And at Black & Veatch, I was part of a smaller group that was evaluating different CRMs and used Salesforce in a couple of smaller business units to justify the case for a larger spend. So every time I had re-engaged with Salesforce throughout my career, it had gotten easier to use and more elegant and just better solution. So I found out that they had a platform called Field Service Lightning that was for, B2C businesses that were doing HVAC, pool cleaning, like, electricians, plumbers, whatever.
Service type, yep.
Yeah, service type stuff. So we did is we created a unique instance of Salesforce for us. We worked with a consultant out of Austin called Roy Kahn, who's incredible, guy named Cole Conroy. And we built a custom space of Salesforce to where an account can either be an address or an entity. So any address that we engage with on the resi or the commercial side is an account, and the account name is that address listed out exactly how it is in Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever. And then that address can have different entities associated with it, as well as different assets. So on the resi side, you may have a homeowner, a property manager, a tenant, and a builder. Those are 4 different entities that are all stakeholders in that location. And ultimately that asset is installed. We build new houses on the residential side. So installed by us, we give away a maintenance plan for the first year and attempt to maintain that. So what it does is ultimately gives a whole kind of chain of history. And when I first came into the business, my dad showed me where my parents had bought their house like 20 years ago. This guy gave him like a binder with like all the receipts from, the HVAC and all of the like pool cleanings that had happened and everything else. I'm like, what if you had kind of a digital overview of your HVAC infrastructure, right? So you take that to the and so we built Salesforce. We hired Roycon, and they did a long engagement with us. And my head of the residential side of the business, Victoria Olson, and I, and a couple other people in the business did a whole engagement with them, and they built this for the resi side of the business. And on the commercial side, we started using it as a CRM because that's what I knew, and my sales team uses it as a CRM religiously. And then we saw the opportunity for commercial service. So one of the things Ashley's working on that you met in some of our prep calls is really adapting that on the commercial side. We have multiple locations that we service for either the Border Patrol or contractors that work for them. And then we have, like I mentioned before, recently started working on a high-rise in Phoenix that has 350 units, and it's, pretty marquee in downtown, right? So to be able to, and even in those examples, you have owners of the real estate, you have property managers, you have tenants, you have, on the federal side, you have different government entities and folks you're engaging with that are talking to this. So it's a way to control that conversation. But ultimately, every one of these assets can be cataloged, and then you can build maintenance plans around them. So this thing needs to have filters changed every, 4 weeks or every 3 months, every quarter versus every week. And we have shooting ranges in Nogales where we do weekly filter changes, right? So, based off of what the OEM dictates is the period at which maintenance needs to be done to this asset. So that can be tracked. And then emergent work that pops up, unit change outs or other, transactional, just kind of like, hey, this thing's not working. This needs a compressor change out. That can be done in there. So it gives stakeholders, facilities managers, folks who are responsible with this, kind of a holistic view into all their infrastructure. And then should they decide to not work with us anymore or go somewhere else, we can download all of that information in CSV files and give it to them. And they at least have, some level of data around their assets. And for companies that are scaling large portfolios, we've done a lot of short-term care work for different folks in Arizona, the guys in the finance office that are sitting there looking at acquiring new facilities or looking at their O&M spend or some of these other things. This is really valuable to them because they can start to forecast when they're going to have to change out units and kind of what the state of repair of their portfolio is. And then lastly, NetSuite, in my opinion, is just best-in-class accounting software, and we've worked internally with them. They have their own ACS, Advanced Customer Solutions, so we have interior consulting with them where they are regularly building, new reports for us and everything else. And then the kind of beauty of all this, these top-tier platforms, is they're all able to communicate via different middleware. Salesforce uses MuleSoft. That's what they push. That's what we use. But you can create you can do a lot of this stuff initially in Google Sheets, especially like we do on the execution side. We do a lot of that on the service side as we've been building out Salesforce. But ultimately, those sheets can be uploaded, and then it's just making sure that those headings are aligned across the different platforms and having something that triggers an update via API across those platforms. So I think every company is a technology company now. I did a lot of stuff at NRG or at Black & Veatch and at GE around conditions-based maintenance and kind of alerting clients when gas turbines were reaching points of failure based off certain temperature or pressure set points. So that stuff is interesting to clients. And even going back to the job description analogy I gave, like, you shouldn't just go in to a client in an enterprise sales situation and say, here's what I'm selling, like, take this and put it in your organization. It's about going in and building a financial model around a problem that they have, and then figuring out how your solution, including the spend associated with your solution, is going to improve, their financial model, whether that's outsourcing workforce and labor for, something like the high-rise example I gave, or whether that is, on an on-site solar deal saying, here's the amortized cost of this over this period, and here's what we're going to do with your electricity rates. And, like, at the end of the day, if you don't set your coach or your advocate in the organization up with something that's going to impact the bottom line positively, then you can't expect them to take it to their CFO or anyone in their organization. And I think that that's what this data allows us to do, and it allows us to kind of provide additional value that others might not be in the space. And in a market like Phoenix, as I'm sure you know, it is very competitive in the HVAC space. There's literally probably more than 1,000, shops out there. So we have to do what we can in order to differentiate ourselves.
No, that makes tons of sense. I think people often, they get salty on a subscription-based payment kind of situation, if it's a piece of software, for whatever it is. But in reality, if you're getting value continuously, right? Let's say, hey, like this is your whole history of your equipment, and hey, you need things replaced at certain times, and like there's maintenance that needs to happen in all kinds of different things. Or hey, this unit, this piece breaks. Generally, 2 years in, it breaks. Like, it's a thing we know about, so we can preemptively take care of it in comparison to waiting until it does break, and then now we're without AC and it's July and it's 115. So like, no, like, I think it gets a bad rap, but like that's one better for all of us, just as in generality, in comparison to just buying something and then hoping that you get the best out of it as long as you can without maintaining it in any way, right? Like that's not how machines work. It's just not, not how computers work. It's just not how they work.
Hope is not a strategy.
Exactly.
No, that's a familiar moniker. And when you're dispatching a tech out into the middle of nowhere, like we literally work on fobs that are 2.5 hours from Tucson, having an understanding of the conditions on the ground, even the model numbers, and during our sales process, when we're looking at a set amount of infrastructure, whether that's one facility or portfolio of many, we gather all of the information we can over every mechanical asset that's on site: serial number, install date, OEM, pretty much you name it, any information, and we can custom build that into Salesforce to capture that if there's information the client wants. And then in our first maintenance, our first cleaning, our first address of that facility, we fill in all the gaps that we don't have, and we're constantly learning, finding things that aren't on the construction documents or finding things that were added later. So we capture that as well. And then when we dispatch techs, they can tell us, hey, we're having issues with this piece of equipment. And the tech can theoretically go out there with every capacitor, the compressor, other key pieces of equipment that he otherwise might have to, go commute another 3 or 4 hours for. So we've learned through all of this, and it's hard to do work in far to reach places, but we focused on that heavily because it's the hard stuff. Like downtown Phoenix, it's hard to work down there. It's much harder to work down there than other places. It's hard to park. It's hard to figure out where to stash tools. Like, it's an unfamiliar environment. It's challenging. Like, those are the places that we like to dive into first because we thrive there, and then we are a differentiated solution from others. But that requires forward staging tools and assets and prepping the labor force before they go, and then having constant communication and support of them as well.
No, that's well put. Our businesses are super similar in that regard. Like, that's one thing. Even though what you do is crazy, in the middle of nowhere. Other than that fact, very similar.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
This has been a ton of fun. So we got one last question we want to ask, and I'll just say it. So if you could go back 20 years, that'd be 2004. What advice would you give yourself?
2004. That would have been freshman year at the Naval Academy.
Yep.
I don't know. I might have studied a little bit harder in school. So I was a physics major starting out for my first 2 years, and I ended as a history major because I had a pretty robust social life and like to have a lot of fun. So still graduated, but I think that STEM is super important. I've seen the value of engineers. I tell this to Ryan all the time, but there's very few engineers with personalities, and those are the best sales guys. You know, throughout my time working in General Electric, NRG, like I've been an effective seller, but when things go, you know, real technical, I always pull in other folks that, you know, are more on the engineering side. And I think that that's helped me, you know, become a better manager. But I would say to sellers that are going to go out and do these like large enterprise deals in energy or HVAC or construction, like you don't just want to be a mailbox. I got this advice a lot at GE. You don't just want to be a mailbox for the client. Like you want to be able to have a conversation yourself with them in order to, you know, assuage their worries and show that subject matter expertise and that depth. So, you know, I probably would have had an easier time as a seller if I would have taken more engineering and technical classes at the academy, but I probably would have had a lot less fun. So I don't think I would change anything, but I would encourage, you know, younger sellers and folks that want to be in this infrastructure space to spend time developing command of the actual science behind it. And, you know, STEM is incredibly important, especially just given the way our country is headed.
No, well put. I frequently think if I could go back 20 years, like would I listen to myself? That's a lot of, you know, 18-year-old Justin or 17-year-old Justin had other things on his mind. So that's fair to say. So this has been a blast. We're going to throw all your links and stuff in the show notes, but if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, just shoot me an email, Tyler, Tyler, at bergenterprises.com. I'm on LinkedIn as well. So anyone wants to reach out, feel free. Love talking about this stuff. Love giving back. Love helping other vets that are considering making this move, and anyone else that I can add value to. And I just want to thank you guys again for having me. If there's anything I can do for you in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. No, this has been wonderful. Your time has been super valuable to us. So thank you a whole bunch. Me and Will have had a blast. You've told quite the tale, which is only like scratching the iceberg. Seriously, Tyler is full of knowledge and wealth of experience for sure. So listeners, I hope you had just as good a time as we had. And until next time, adios.
Adios.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Building Scale. To help us reach even more people, please share this episode with a friend, a colleague, or on social media.
Remember, the 3 pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology.
And our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy.
So if you think your company's technology pillar could use some improvement, book a call with us to see how we can help maximize your IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
And until next time,
Keep building scale.
Scale.